the forgotten hero who saved 100,000 Jews from the Nazis. Chiune Sugihara'S secret operation in the sweltering summer of 1940. As the world teetered on the brink of chaos, a lone figure stood at the window of a modest consulate in Kaunas, Lithuania. Chiune Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat in his mid-30s, gazed out at the bustling street below, his brow furrowed with concern. The air was thick with tension, and whispers of impending doom echoed through the cobblestone alleys of the old city. Sugihara had always been a man of routine, finding comfort in the predictability of diplomatic life. Each morning, he would rise with the sun, don his meticulously pressed suit, and make his way to the consulate. There, he would spend his days poring over reports, crafting eloquent correspondence, and navigating the delicate intricacies of international relations. But on this particular morning, as he sipped his green tea and prepared for another day of paperwork, he had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The first hint of the extraordinary events to come arrived with a gentle knock on the consulate door. Sugihara'S assistant, a young Lithuanian named Jonas, entered with a look of apprehension on his face. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's a crowd gathering outside. They're asking to speak with you." Curious and slightly concerned, Sugihara made his way to the entrance. As he opened the heavy wooden door, he was met with a sight that would haunt him for years to come. Hundreds of people, their faces etched with fear and desperation, stood before him. Men, women, and children of all ages, clutching worn suitcases and bundles of hastily gathered possessions, looked at him with pleading eyes. A man stepped forward from the crowd, his beard streaked with gray, and his eyes weary from sleepless nights. "Mr. Sugihara," he said, his voice quavering, "we are Jews who have fled Poland. The Nazis are coming, and we have nowhere else to go. We've heard that Japan might grant us transit visas. You're our last hope." In that moment, as Sugihara looked into the man's eyes and saw the reflection of countless souls hanging in the balance, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He knew that his next actions would determine the fate of these people and potentially thousands more. Sugihara invited the man, who introduced himself as Zorak Warhaftig, into his office. As they sat across from each other, the din of the anxious crowd outside filtering through the windows, Warhaftig explained the dire situation. The Soviet Union had annexed Lithuania, and the Jews who had sought refuge there were now trapped. Their only hope for escape lay in obtaining transit visas through Japan to reach safer shores. As Sugihara listened, his mind raced. He knew that issuing visas without proper authorization from Tokyo could end his career, disgrace his family, and potentially put his own life at risk. The Japanese government had strict immigration policies, and relations with Nazi Germany were delicate. But as he looked at Warhaftig and thought of the desperate faces outside, he knew he couldn't turn his back on them. "I will do what I can," Sugihara said, his voice firm with resolve. "Come back tomorrow and bring as many people as you can. We'll start the visa process." That night, as Sugihara lay in bed beside his wife, Yukiko, he shared the day's events and his decision. Yukiko, a woman of great compassion and strength, took her husband's hand and said, "You must do what your heart tells you is right. I will support you, no matter what comes." The next morning, Sugihara arrived at the consulate before dawn. As the sun rose over Kaunas, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, he found an even larger crowd waiting for him. Men in worn suits, women clutching children to their chests, elderly couples supporting each other, all with the same look of desperate hope in their eyes. Sugihara worked tirelessly, his hand cramping as he filled out visa after visa. Each document represented not just an individual, but entire families and future generations. As the days passed, word spread of the Japanese diplomat who was offering a lifeline to those fleeing Nazi persecution. The consulate became a beacon of hope in a darkening world. Sugihara's small office was constantly packed, the air thick with the mingled sense of sweat, fear, and fragile hope. He worked from sunrise to well past midnight, stopping only for brief moments to eat the meals Yukiko brought him or to massage his aching hand. As he worked, Sugihara listened to the stories of those he was helping. There was Sarah, a young mother who had fled Warsaw with her infant son strapped to her chest, walking for days through forests and fields to reach Lithuania. There was David, a renowned violinist who had played for kings and queens, now reduced to carrying his precious instrument in a tattered case as he sought safety. And there was old Rabbi Levi, whose wrinkled hands shook as he received his visa, tears of gratitude streaming down his weathered cheeks. Each story strengthened Sugihara's resolve, even as the risks of his actions became increasingly clear. He received stern warnings from his superiors in Tokyo, ordering him to stop issuing visas without proper authorization. But Sugihara chose to follow his conscience, replying with vague assurances while continuing his life-saving work. The pressure was immense. Sugihara lost weight, dark circles forming under his eyes as he pushed himself to the limit. Yukiko worked alongside him, helping to organize the crowds, offering words of comfort to the distraught, and supporting her husband through the long, grueling days. As July turned to August, the situation grew more desperate. Reports of Nazi advances sent waves of panic through the Jewish community. Sugihara's hand moved faster, his signature becoming a blur as he raced against time. Then, on August 7th, came the news they had all been dreading. The Soviet Union, which had annexed Lithuania, ordered all foreign embassies to close. Sugihara had less than a month to help as many people as he could before he would be forced to leave. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and ceaseless work. Sugihara barely left the consulate, catching brief moments of rest on a small cot in his office. The line of people seeking visas seemed endless, stretching around the block and into the distance. As the deadline approached, Sugihara made a fateful decision. He would not stop issuing visas until the very last moment. Even as he and Yukiko packed their belongings, preparing to leave Kaunas, he continued to write and stamp documents. On the morning of August 31st, 1940, Sugihara stood on the platform of the Kaunas train station. The scene was one of controlled chaos, with hundreds of people pressing forward, desperate for one last chance at salvation. As the train began to move, Sugihara leaned out the window, still writing visas. He threw them to the crowd, his arms aching, his eyes blurred with exhaustion and unshed tears. Even as the train picked up speed, he continued his work, determined to save as many lives as possible until the very last second. The train disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a legacy that would remain hidden for decades. In just over a month, Sugihara had issued more than 2,000 visas, each one representing not just an individual, but entire families and future generations. As the train carried them away from Kaunas, Yukiko held her exhausted husband close. "You did everything you could," she whispered, her voice filled with pride and love. Sugihara nodded, his eyes closed, his mind still racing with the faces of those he had helped and those he had been forced to leave behind. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew in his heart that he had done the right thing. The journey back to Japan was long and fraught with tension. As they traveled through the Soviet Union and then across war-torn Europe, Sugihara and Yukiko saw firsthand the devastation that was sweeping across the continent. Each bombed-out building, each refugee camp they passed, reinforced the importance of what they had done in Kaunas. Upon their return to Japan, the full consequences of Sugihara's actions became clear. He was summoned to the Foreign Ministry, where he faced a panel of stern-faced superiors. They berated him for disobeying orders, for potentially compromising Japan's diplomatic position, for acting without authorization. Sugihara stood before them, his back straight, his gaze unwavering. When asked to explain his actions, he spoke simply and from the heart. "I may have disobeyed my government," he said, "but I could not disobey my conscience. I did what I believed was right as a human being." His words fell on deaf ears. The ministry officials informed him that his career in the diplomatic service was over. Sugihara was forced to resign, his years of service and dedication cast aside because of his act of humanity. The next few years were difficult for the Sugihara family. They struggled to make ends meet, with Chiune taking on a series of menial jobs to support his wife and children. He worked as a translator, a factory worker, and even sold light bulbs door to door. The man who had once moved in diplomatic circles now found himself struggling to put food on the table. But through it all, Sugihara never regretted his actions in Chiune. At night, as he lay awake worrying about the future, he would think of the faces of those he had helped and find strength in the knowledge that they had been given a chance at life. Years passed, and the world slowly began to heal from the wounds of war. Sugihara and his family eventually found some stability, settling into a quiet life in a small town outside of Tokyo. He rarely spoke of his time in Lithuania, carrying the weight of his actions in silence. But the seeds of his courage had taken root. Unbeknownst to Sugihara, the people he had saved, now numbering in the tens of thousands when accounting for descendants, began to search for the man who had given them a second chance at life. It wasn't until 1968, almost 3 decades after those fateful days in Chiune, that Sugihara's story began to emerge. Joshua Nishiri, an Israeli diplomat serving in Tokyo, had heard rumors of a Japanese man who had saved Jews during the war. After months of searching, he finally tracked down Sugihara. The meeting between Nishiri and Sugihara was emotional, as Nishiri explained that he was one of the many people Sugihara had saved. The normally stoic diplomat broke down in tears. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember those desperate days in Chiune, the faces of those he had helped, the weight of the decisions he had made. Nishiri's discovery set in motion a chain of events that would finally bring Sugihara's heroism to light. Survivors began to come forward, sharing their stories of the Japanese diplomat who had saved them from certain death. The world slowly began to learn of the quiet hero who had risked everything to do what was right. In 1984, Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, recognized Chiune Sugihara as righteous among the nations. It was a long overdue acknowledgement of his extraordinary courage and humanity. Sugihara, now in his 80s, traveled to Jerusalem for the ceremony. As he stood before a gathering of survivors and their descendants, he was overwhelmed by the impact of his actions. Thousands of people were alive because of the visas he had issued all those years ago. One by one, survivors came forward to thank him. There was Sali Ganner, who had been a teenager in Chiune when Sugihara issued him a visa. Now a grown man with children and grandchildren of his own, Ganner embraced Sugihara, tears streaming down his face. "You didn't just save me," he said. "You saved generations." Another survivor, Maria Kaminska, presented Sugihara with a book containing the names of over 800 Polish Jews who had escaped through Japan thanks to his visas. Each name in this book represents a life saved, a family continued, a future made possible, she said. Her voice choked with emotion. As Sugihara looked out at the sea of faces, he was struck by the enormity of what he had done. Each person represented not just a life saved, but entire family trees that had been allowed to grow and flourish. In his acceptance speech, Sugihara remained humble. "I may have extended my hand, but it was they who grasped it," he said. "Their courage, their determination to live, that is the real story of heroism." The recognition from Yad Vashem marked a turning point. Sugihara's story began to spread, capturing the imagination of people around the world. Books were written, documentaries were made, and his act of courage became a symbol of hope and humanity in the face of unspeakable evil. But even as the accolades poured in, Sugihara remained the same humble, principled man he had always been. When asked why he had risked everything to help strangers, he would simply say, "They were human beings and they needed help. I'm glad I found the strength to make the decision to give it to them." Sugihara passed away in 1986, at the age of 86. His funeral was attended not only by his family and friends, but by numerous survivors and their descendants. They came from all over the world to pay their respects to the man who had given them the gift of life. But the story of Chiune Sugihara didn't end with his death. In fact, the most astonishing chapter was yet to be revealed. In 2018, more than 30 years after Sugihara's passing, a remarkable discovery was made. In an old attic in Tokyo, hidden away for decades, a diary was found. It belonged to Yukiko Sugihara, Chiune's wife and partner in his life-saving work. The diary, its pages yellowed with age but its ink still clear, contained a secret that had been kept for over 70 years. As researchers carefully translated the entries, they uncovered a truth that would shake the world's understanding of Sugihara'S actions. The final entry, dated just weeks before Yukiko's death, read, "Today, I must confess the truth that Chiune and I have kept hidden for so long. The number of visas we issued was not in the thousands, but in the tens of thousands. We didn't stop at 2,000. In secret, working through the night, forging documents, and calling in every favor we could, we managed to save over 100,000 souls. The risk was immense, but so was the reward of each life spared. We knew that if this information ever came to light while the war raged, it would mean certain death for us and possibly retribution against those we saved. So we downsized the numbers, kept the true scale of our operation hidden, even from those we helped. Now, as I reach the end of my life, I feel the world must know the full extent of what love and courage can accomplish. Chiune and I often spoke of revealing this truth, but we always held back, fearing the consequences. But now, I believe it's time for the whole story to be told. In those desperate days in Kaunas, we didn't just work during office hours. Every night, after the crowds had gone, Chiune and I would return to the consulate. We worked by candlelight, our hands cramping, our eyes straining in the dim light. We created additional visas, using every blank form we could find, even reusing numbers when we ran out. We reached out to every contact we had, diplomats from other countries, underground resistance members, anyone who could help. We created a network of hope, stretching across borders and oceans. There were nights when we thought we would be discovered. Every knock on the door, every strange sound in the street sent our hearts racing. But we kept going, driven by the faces of those we had seen, the stories we had heard. I remember one night, just days before we had to leave Kaunas. Chiune turned to me, his face gaunt with exhaustion, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Yukiko," he said, "what we're doing, it's bigger than us. It's bigger than Japan, bigger than this war. We're fighting for the future of humanity itself." In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened to us, no matter the consequences we might face, we were doing the right thing. As I write these words, I can almost feel Chiune's presence beside me, urging me to share our story. The world knows him as a hero who saved thousands. But the truth is even more extraordinary. One man, one woman, armed with nothing but a pen, paper, and an unshakable moral compass, managed to save not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands of lives. I hope that when this truth comes to light, it will inspire others to act with courage and compassion, even in the darkest of times. For it is in such moments that the true strength of the human spirit shines brightest. The revelation sent shockwaves through the international community. Historians, governments, and the descendants of those saved scrambled to verify the claim. As the evidence mounted, the true magnitude of the Sugihara'S actions came to light, forever changing our understanding of this historic rescue operation. Researchers from universities around the world formed a joint task force, dedicating themselves to uncovering the full extent of the Sugihara'S work. They pored over old records, cross-referencing visa numbers, passenger manifests, and refugee accounts. What they found was astounding. The Sugihara'S had indeed worked with a clandestine group of diplomats, resistance fighters, and ordinary citizens who had all played a part in this monumental rescue operation. This network, stretching across continents, had worked tirelessly to ensure the safety of those fleeing Nazi persecution. Dr. Sarah Goldstein, a historian at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, led the research team. "What we've uncovered is nothing short of miraculous," she said in a press conference that was broadcast worldwide. The Sugihara'S didn't just bend the rules. They rewrote them entirely. They created an underground railroad of sorts, using every resource at their disposal to save as many lives as possible. One by one, new stories emerged, each more incredible than the last. There was the account of the Rosenberg family, who had received visas with seemingly duplicate numbers, allowing them to escape just hours before the Nazis arrived in their town. "We always wondered about those visas," said Jacob Rosenberg, now in his 80s. "They looked different from the others, but we never questioned it. We were just grateful to be alive. Now we know." Sugihara was taking enormous risks, even falsifying documents to save us. Then there was the testimony of Captain Hideaki Tanaka, a Japanese merchant marine officer who had commanded a ship during the war. In a recorded interview discovered in the archives of the Japanese Maritime Museum, Tanaka spoke of clandestine nighttime voyages. "Our vessels were packed beyond capacity," Tanaka had said, his voice thick with emotion even decades later. "We sailed under cover of darkness, our decks crowded with refugees clutching Sugihara visas. I knew we were breaking maritime law, but how could we turn them away? Sugihara had given them hope, and we had to see it through." As researchers delved deeper, they uncovered a vast network of safe houses across Europe and Asia, all linked to the Sugihara'S operation. In attics, basements, and hidden rooms, families had sheltered those fleeing persecution, all connected by the thin thread of hope that Chiune Sugihara's visas represented. In Poland, archaeologists excavating a site near the former ghetto in Warsaw made a startling discovery. Hidden beneath the floorboards of an old house, they found a cache of documents, letters, photographs, and diary entries, all related to the Sugihara rescue operation. Among the papers was a faded photograph of Chiune Sugihara, scribbled on the back in Yiddish. "Remember this face. He is our guardian angel." The photo had been passed from hand to hand, a talisman of hope for those still waiting for their chance to escape. As the full scope of the Sugihara's actions became clear, the impact on the world was profound. The number of lives touched by their courage was staggering. Entire communities, from New York to Tel Aviv, from Sydney to Toronto, traced their existence to those fateful days in Kaunas. In New York City's Lower East Side, a neighborhood long known for its Jewish heritage, a community gathering was held to honor the Sugihara'S. Hundreds of people packed into a local synagogue, many holding candles and photographs of their ancestors who had been saved by the Japanese diplomat. Rabbi David Stern, whose grandparents had escaped Lithuania with Sugihara visas, addressed the crowd. "We stand here today, not just as individuals, but as living testaments to the power of compassion," he said, his voice echoing through the packed room. "Each of us represents not just a life saved, but entire family trees that have been allowed to grow and flourish. We are the fruits of the Sugihara's courage." Similar gatherings were held around the world. In Melbourne, Australia, a group of survivors and their descendants organized a Sugihara Sabbath, dedicating their weekly prayers to the memory of the man who had saved them. In Toronto, a mural was commissioned, depicting Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara surrounded by a sea of faces, the generations their actions had made possible. The story of Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara became more than just a tale of wartime heroism. It became a testament to the power of individual action in the face of overwhelming evil. It challenged people around the world to consider what they would do in a similar situation, to examine their own moral courage. In Israel, where the impact of the Sugihara's actions was perhaps felt most keenly, the response was particularly powerful. A new wing was added to Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, dedicated to honoring the Sugihara's and documenting the full extent of their rescue operation. The Sugihara Wing, as it came to be known, was a marvel of modern museum design. Visitors entered through a recreation of the Kaunas consulate, complete with period furnishings and the actual desk at which Sugihara had written thousands of visas. As they moved through the exhibit, they were confronted with the faces and stories of those who had been saved. One of the most powerful installations was a Tree of Life, a towering sculpture in the center of the wing. Its branches held thousands of leaves, each inscribed with the name of a person or family saved by the Sugihara's. Visitors could touch a leaf, causing a screen nearby to light up with photos and stories of that family's descendants. "It's overwhelming," said Emma Cohen, a visitor from London, as she stood before the tree. "To see the sheer number of lives affected, to realize that each leaf represents entire generations. It's a powerful reminder of how much impact one person's choices can have." The Sugihara wing quickly became one of the most visited areas of Yad Vashem, with people coming from around the world to learn about this extraordinary chapter of Holocaust history. School groups, diplomats, and world leaders all made pilgrimages to the site, each leaving with a renewed sense of the power of individual action. In Japan, where Sugihara'S actions had long been a source of complex emotions, there was a national reckoning. For years, Sugihara had been a controversial figure in his home country. His disobedience to government orders had been seen by some as a stain on Japan's diplomatic corps. But now, in light of the full scale of his actions, that perception was rapidly changing. The Japanese government issued a formal apology for its treatment of Sugihara after the war. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, in a televised address to the nation, spoke of the need to honor Sugihara's legacy. Chiune Sugihara demonstrated the best of Japanese values: compassion, honor, and the courage to stand up for what is right, Suga said. "We failed to recognize his heroism in his lifetime. Today, we correct that mistake. Sugihara-san's actions will forever be a source of pride for Japan." The government announced a series of initiatives to honor Sugihara's memory. His story became a mandatory part of school curriculums across Japan. A national museum dedicated to his life and work was established in Tokyo, featuring interactive exhibits that allowed visitors to experience the pressure and moral dilemmas Sugihara faced. Perhaps most significantly, the Japanese Foreign Ministry established the Sugihara Diplomatic Corps. This elite group of diplomats was specially trained in ethical decision-making and charged with promoting human rights and humanitarian values in Japan's international relations. "We want to create a generation of diplomats who embody Sugihara's spirit," said Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi at the program's launch. "Diplomats who understand that sometimes doing what is right means going beyond the letter of the law." The impact of the Sugihara's story extended far beyond Japan and Israel. Around the world, people were captivated by this tale of courage and compassion. International diplomats cited the Sugihara'S as an example of moral leadership in times of crisis. Their story was invoked in discussions about modern-day refugee crises, a reminder of the profound impact that individual action can have in the face of systemic injustice. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, a special session was convened to discuss the lessons of the Sugihara story. Diplomats from around the world gathered to reflect on the implications of this heroic act for modern international relations. In a world where we too often feel powerless in the face of large-scale crises, the Sugihara'S remind us of the power of individual action, said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. They challenge us to ask, what will we do in a similar situation? And more importantly, what are we doing now in the face of the humanitarian crises of our own time? The session resulted in the establishment of the Sugihara Initiative, a UN program designed to recognize and support diplomats and civil servants who take extraordinary actions to protect human rights, often at personal risk. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was felt in the lives of the descendants of those the Sugihara'S had saved. All around the world, people came forward with stories of how their families had survived thanks to a visa issued in Kaunas in the summer of 1940. There was Michael Silverstein, a renowned heart surgeon in Boston, who had pioneered life-saving techniques that had helped thousands. "If not for the Sugihara'S," he said in an interview that went viral on social media, "I wouldn't be here. The lives I've saved through my work, that's part of their legacy too." Silverstein's story sparked a movement. Inspired by his words, other descendants of Sugihara visa recipients began to share their own stories of impact. A website, Sugihara's Legacy, was created to collect these tales. Within months, it had gathered thousands of entries from around the world. There was Anna Friedman, an environmental scientist in California, whose research on clean water technologies was helping communities in developing countries. My grandfather always told me that we had a responsibility to make the most of the life we've been given, she said. The Sugihara'S gave us that chance, and I feel a duty to pay it forward. In a small town in Israel, Sarah Levin, a third-grade teacher, stood before her class and told them about her grandfather. He was just a boy when he received a visa from Mr. Sugihara, she explained. That visa didn't just save his life. It saved mine and yours too, because many of you are here because your families were saved by the same man. Levin's lesson plan spread first throughout Israel, then internationally. Schools around the world began incorporating the Sugihara'S story into their curricula, using it as a launching point for discussions about moral courage, compassion, and the power of individual action. The ripple effects of the Sugihara'S actions were incalculable. Scientists who had developed vaccines, artists who had created works that touched millions, leaders who had shaped policies and changed lives, all of them owed their existence to those visas issued in Chiune. As the world grappled with this expanded understanding of the Sugihara'S heroism, a new appreciation emerged for the power of individual action. People began to ask themselves, what would I have done in Sugihara'S position? And more importantly, what can I do today in my own life to stand up for what's right? The story sparked a global movement of compassion and moral courage. People around the world, inspired by the Sugihara'S, began to take action in their own communities. They volunteered at refugee centers, spoke out against injustice, and looked for ways to make a difference in the lives of others. In Japan, a group of young diplomats formed the Sugihara Initiative, dedicated to promoting moral leadership in international relations. They advocated for more humane refugee policies and worked to build bridges between nations. Keiko Tanaka, one of the founding members of the initiative, spoke of the impact Sugihara'S story had on her career choice. Growing up, I always thought diplomacy was about following rules, she said. But Sugihara-san showed us that true diplomacy is about following your conscience. That's the kind of diplomat I want to be. The initiative gained traction, spreading the diplomatic corps around the world. Young diplomats in countries from Sweden to South Africa began to form their own chapters, each dedicated to promoting Sugihara'S values in their work. In Lithuania, the site of the former Japanese consulate in Kaunas was transformed into a museum and educational center. Visitors from around the world came to stand in the very spot where Sugihara had written those life-saving visas, to reflect on the power of one person to change the course of history. The museum became a pilgrimage site of sorts, drawing people from all walks of life. World leaders made official visits, schools organized trips, and individuals came to pay their respects and find inspiration. One particularly moving moment came when a group of Japanese and Jewish youth met at the museum as part of an exchange program. Together, they read from Sugihara'S writings and discussed how his legacy could inform their own lives and choices. Standing here, in this place where so many lives were saved, I feel a great responsibility, said Yuki Sato, a high school student from Tokyo. Sugihara-san's courage challenges me to think about how I can make a difference in my own way. The story of Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara became a beacon of hope in a world often darkened by conflict and despair. It reminded people that even in the face of overwhelming evil, there is always a choice. That compassion, courage, and moral conviction can light a path through the darkest of times. As the years passed, the legend of the Sugihara'S only grew. Books were written, films were made, and their story was told and retold around the world. But more than that, their legacy lived on in the actions of ordinary people, inspired by their example to stand up for what is right, to help those in need, to be a light in the darkness. In 2021, on the 80th anniversary of Sugihara'S life-saving actions, a global commemoration was held. In cities around the world, people gathered to honor the Sugihara'S memory and reflect on the ongoing relevance of their courage. In New York City, 1,000 origami cranes were released in Central Park, each bearing the name of a family saved by Sugihara. In Tokyo, a candlelight vigil was held outside the Foreign Ministry, with participants pledging to carry forward Sugihara's legacy of compassion. But perhaps the most poignant ceremony took place in Kaunas itself. In the square outside the former Japanese consulate, now the Sugihara House Museum, a diverse crowd gathered. There were descendants of those Sugihara had saved, Japanese diplomats, Lithuanian officials, and people who had simply been moved by the Sugihara'S story. As the sun set, casting a golden light over the crowd, Nobuki Sugihara, Chiune's son, addressed the gathering. Now in his 80s, Nobuki had dedicated his life to sharing his father's story and promoting understanding between cultures. "My father never sought recognition for his actions," Nobuki said, his voice strong despite his years. "He simply did what he believed was right. But today, as I look out at all of you, people from different nations, different faiths, different walks of life, I see the true power of his legacy." Nobuki paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "In a world that often seems divided, my father's story reminds us of our shared humanity. It shows us that compassion knows no borders, that courage can overcome fear, that one person can indeed make a difference." As Nobuki spoke, a hush fell over the square. People leaned in, hanging on every word, feeling the weight of history and the promise of the future in equal measure. "My father's story is not just about the past," Nobuki continued. "It's about the choices we make every day. It's about seeing the humanity in each other, about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to change lives, to shape history." As Nobuki's words rang out, many in the crowd were moved to tears. They were tears of gratitude for the lives saved, tears of admiration for the courage displayed, but also tears of hope. Hope that they too could make a difference in the world. The ceremony concluded with a powerful symbolic gesture. Attendees were given small plants, seedlings of the sakura or cherry blossom tree, a symbol of renewal and the ephemeral nature of life in Japanese culture. These seedlings were to be planted around the world, a living memorial to the Sugihara'S legacy. "As these trees grow," Nobuki said, "may they remind us of the seeds of compassion my parents planted, and may we all nurture those seeds in our own lives." In the days and weeks that followed, social media was flooded with images of people planting their sakura seedlings. From the suburbs of Melbourne to the mountains of Peru, from bustling Tokyo to rural Kenya, these trees took root, a global forest of remembrance and hope. The 80th anniversary commemoration served as a catalyst, reinvigorating interest in the Sugihara'S story and sparking new initiatives to carry forward their legacy. In the United States, a group of lawmakers introduced the Sugihara Act, a bill designed to reform and humanize the country's approach to refugees and asylum seekers. The act proposed increasing refugee quotas, streamlining the asylum process, and providing more support for resettlement efforts. The Sugihara'S showed us that when we open our doors to those in need, we enrich our own societies, said Senator Maria Rodriguez, one of the bill's sponsors. This act is about living up to the best of our values, about being the kind of nation that Chiune Sugihara believed we could be. The act faced opposition, but its supporters drew inspiration from Sugihara'S persistence. They shared stories of lives saved and contributions made by refugees throughout history. Slowly but surely, public opinion began to shift. In Europe, where the refugee crisis had long been a contentious issue, the Sugihara'S story provided a new framework for discussion. Policymakers and citizens alike began to view the situation not just as a political or economic challenge, but as a moral imperative. The European Union launched the Sugihara Refugee Integration Program, a comprehensive initiative to support refugees in building new lives. The program offered language training, job placement assistance, and community integration support, all designed to help refugees become active, contributing members of their new societies. We asked ourselves, what would Sugihara do? Said EU Commissioner Helena Bergstrom at the program's launch. The answer was clear. He would welcome these people with open arms and help them rebuild their lives. That's exactly what we aim to do. Meanwhile, in the corporate world, a new movement was taking shape. Inspired by Sugihara'S courage in defying unjust orders, a group of business leaders launched the Sugihara Principle, a pledge to prioritize ethical considerations in decision-making, even when it might conflict with short-term profits or conventional business wisdom. Companies that signed the Sugihara Principle committed to a range of ethical practices, from ensuring fair labor conditions throughout their supply chains to taking active steps to reduce their environmental impact. They also pledged to create internal mechanisms that would protect and support employees who spoke out against unethical practices. Chiune Sugihara showed us that moral courage in the face of systemic injustice can change the world, said Jamal Nasser, CEO of a multinational tech company and one of the founders of the Sugihara Principle. In the business world, we face ethical dilemmas every day. The Sugihara Principle is our commitment to always strive to do what's right, not just what's profitable. The initiative quickly gained traction. Within a year, over 1,000 companies across 6 continents had signed the pledge. It sparked a broader conversation about corporate responsibility and the role of business in addressing global challenges. In the field of education, the Sugihara'S story became a powerful tool for teaching ethics, history, and civic responsibility. Schools around the world incorporated the Sugihara'S actions into their curricula, using it as a springboard to discuss moral decision-making, the consequences of prejudice, and the power of individual action. The Sugihara Educational Foundation, established by a coalition of educators and historians, developed a comprehensive curriculum guide. It included lesson plans, interactive activities, and resources for teachers to effectively share the Sugihara'S story and its contemporary relevance. One particularly innovative aspect of the curriculum was the Sugihara simulation, an immersive role-playing exercise that put students in Sugihara's shoes. Participants had to navigate the complex ethical dilemmas he faced, making decisions under pressure and grappling with the potential consequences of their choices. It's one thing to read about Sugihara's decisions in a textbook, said Leah Goldstein, a high school teacher in Chicago who implemented the simulation. It's another thing entirely to feel the weight of those decisions yourself. This exercise really brings home the reality of what Sugihara faced, and it challenges students to think deeply about their own moral compasses. The impact of these educational initiatives was profound. Students who engaged with the Sugihara story reported a greater sense of empathy, a stronger commitment to standing up against injustice, and a deeper understanding of the complexities of moral decision-making. In the arts, the Sugihara story continued to inspire creators around the world. Playwrights, filmmakers, novelists, and artists all found new ways to explore and express the themes of courage, compassion, and moral conviction embodied by Chiune and Yukiko. A powerful example was The Consul's Pen, a critically acclaimed play that debuted on Broadway before touring internationally. The play focused not just on Sugihara's actions in Kaunas, but on the years that followed. His struggle with the consequences of his choices, his family's hardships, and his eventual vindication. We wanted to show the full human story, said playwright Marcus Chiune. Sugihara's heroism in Kaunas was extraordinary, but so was his quiet dignity in the face of adversity in the years that followed. It's a reminder that moral courage isn't just about one grand gesture, it's a lifelong commitment. The play struck a chord with audiences around the world. Its run in Tokyo was particularly poignant, with many viewers leaving the theater visibly moved, grappling with complex emotions about their country's history and their own moral responsibilities. In the world of visual art, the Sugihara International Art Prize was established, calling for works that explored themes of moral courage, compassion, and human rights. The inaugural exhibition, held simultaneously in galleries in New York, Tokyo, and Tel Aviv, showcased a stunning array of paintings, sculptures, and multimedia installations inspired by the Sugihara's legacy. One of the most talked about pieces was Visas for Life, a large-scale installation by Brazilian artist Isabella Santos. The work consisted of thousands of origami cranes, each made from paper printed with the names of Sugihara visa recipients. The cranes were suspended in the shape of a giant hand, a powerful visual metaphor for the life-giving power of Sugihara's actions. As the Sugihara's story continued to spread and inspire, it also prompted deeper scholarly inquiry. Historians, ethicists, and social scientists delved into the conditions that allowed the Sugihara'S to act as they did, seeking lessons that could be applied to contemporary challenges. Dr. Yael Levin, a professor of ethics at Oxford University, conducted a comprehensive study on the factors that enable moral courage in the face of systemic injustice. Her research, which used the Sugihara case as a central example, identified key traits and circumstances that contribute to ethical decision-making under pressure. What we found, Dr. Levin explained in a TED Talk that quickly went viral, is that moral courage isn't just an innate quality. It's something that can be cultivated. The Sugihara'S story shows us how empathy, a strong ethical framework, and a sense of personal responsibility can empower individuals to stand up against even the most formidable systems of oppression. Dr. Levin's work sparked a new wave of research into moral psychology and decision-making. Universities around the world established centers for the study of ethical leadership, many named in honor of Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara. As academics deepen our understanding of the Sugihara'S actions, practitioners in various fields work to apply these insights. The Sugihara principles of ethical decision-making, derived from this research, began to be incorporated into training programs for diplomats, business leaders, and public servants around the world. In the realm of international relations, the Sugihara'S story continued to resonate, particularly in discussions about the role of diplomacy in protecting human rights. The United Nations Human Rights Council established the annual Sugihara Lecture, inviting prominent thinkers and leaders to reflect on the responsibilities of the international community in the face of humanitarian crises. At the inaugural lecture, delivered by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai, the young activist drew powerful parallels between Sugihara's actions and contemporary human rights challenges. Chiune Sugihara faced a choice, Malala said, her voice ringing through the UN Assembly Hall. He could follow orders and protect his career, or he could follow his conscience and save lives. Today, we all face similar choices. When we see injustice, when we see suffering, do we look away to protect our comfort, or do we act, even at personal cost, to help those in need? Her words struck a chord, reigniting debates about the international community's response to ongoing refugee crises, political persecutions, and human rights abuses around the world. In Japan, the Sugihara'S story continued to prompt national reflection. The country, long grappling with the legacy of its wartime actions, found in Sugihara a figure of hope and redemption, a reminder of the capacity for moral courage even in the darkest of times. The Japanese government, building on its earlier apology, took further steps to honor Sugihara's legacy. The Ministry of Education revised history textbooks to give greater prominence to Sugihara's actions, presenting them as a model of moral leadership and individual responsibility. Moreover, the government established the Sugihara International Scholarship Program, offering fully funded graduate studies to students from countries that have been affected by the Holocaust. The program aimed to foster international understanding and cultivate future leaders committed to human rights and cross-cultural cooperation. Through this program, we honor not just Sugihara's memory, but his vision of a world where compassion transcends borders, said Japanese Education Minister Keiko Tanaka at the program's launch. We are investing in a future where the next generation of leaders will be equipped to make the kind of courageous choices Sugihara made. The impact of the Sugihara story continued to ripple out in unexpected ways. In the tech world, a group of software engineers, inspired by Sugihara's example, developed an AI ethics framework they called the Sugihara Protocol. This set of guidelines and algorithms was designed to ensure that artificial intelligence systems would prioritize human welfare and ethical considerations in their decision-making processes. We asked ourselves, how would Sugihara approach the ethical challenges of AI? Said Dr. Aisha Patel, lead developer of the protocol. The result is a system that doesn't just optimize for efficiency or profit, but for human rights and social good. The Sugihara protocol quickly gained traction in the tech industry, with major companies adopting it as part of their AI development processes. It sparked a broader conversation about ethics in technology and the responsibility of developers to consider the wider implications of their work. In the world of sports, the International Olympic Committee announced the creation of the Sugihara Award for Moral Courage in Sports. This honor would be bestowed upon athletes who demonstrated exceptional ethical conduct, particularly in standing up against discrimination or injustice in the world of sports. The first recipient of the award was Brazilian soccer star Carlos Silva, who had risked his career by speaking out against racism in football and working to promote inclusivity in the sport. At the award ceremony, Silva spoke of how learning about Sugihara had influenced his own actions. Sugihara showed us that sometimes being a hero means simply doing the right thing, even when it's hard, Silva said. In my own small way, I've tried to follow his example. If we all do that, in whatever field we're in, imagine how much better the world could be. As the years passed, the Sugihara'S story continued to evolve and find new relevance. Climate activists cited Sugihara as an example of the kind of moral courage needed to address global warming. Mental health advocates drew parallels between Sugihara's actions and the importance of moral resilience in maintaining psychological well-being. In 2025, on the 85th anniversary of Sugihara's life-saving actions, a global event called 85 Hours for Humanity was organized. For 85 consecutive hours, people around the world engaged in acts of kindness and moral courage, inspired by the Sugihara'S legacy. The event saw an outpouring of compassion on a scale rarely seen before. Volunteers in hundreds of cities organized food drives, cleaned up neighborhoods, visited lonely elders, and welcomed refugees. Others used the time to stand up against injustice in their communities, reporting discrimination, challenging unfair policies, and advocating for those whose voices often go unheard. Social media was flooded with stories of these acts, big and small, each tagged with hashtag 85 Hours for Humanity. The event trended globally, spreading the Sugihara'S story to millions who had never heard it before and inspiring countless acts of kindness and courage. One particularly moving story emerged from a small town in rural America. A group of high school students, inspired by Sugihara'S example, decided to stand up against bullying in their school. They organized a campaign of kindness, going out of their way to include isolated students, challenge discriminatory behavior, and create a more welcoming school environment. "We're not saving thousands of lives like Sugihara did," said Chiune, one of the student organizers, "but we realize that we can make a real difference in our own community." Sugihara'S story showed us that change starts with individual actions. The students' initiative caught the attention of national media, sparking similar movements in schools across the country. It was a powerful reminder that the Sugihara'S legacy could inspire positive change even in everyday situations. As the 85 Hours for Humanity event concluded, scholars and commentators reflected on the enduring power of the Sugihara story. Why, they asked, did this tale of moral courage from 85 years ago continue to resonate so strongly? Dr. Michael Goldstein, a professor of cultural studies at the University of California, offered one perspective in a widely shared essay. "The Sugihara'S story speaks to something fundamental in the human experience," he wrote. "It reminds us of our capacity for compassion, even in the darkest of times. It challenges us to consider what we would do in a similar situation. But more than that, it offers hope. In a world that often seems overwhelming in its complexity and its problems, Sugihara shows us that individual actions matter, that one person, choosing to do what's right, can change the course of history. Indeed, as the world faced ongoing challenges, from refugee crises to climate change, from political polarization to technological disruption, the Sugihara'S story continued to offer a beacon of hope and a call to action. It inspired diplomats to advocate for more humane policies, even when it was politically unpopular. It motivated business leaders to prioritize ethical considerations over short-term profits. It encouraged ordinary citizens to stand up against injustice in their communities, to extend a hand to those in need, to be the change they wish to see in the world. The story of Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara had transcended its historical context to become a universal parable of moral courage and human compassion. It served as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming evil and seeming helplessness, Individuals have the power to make a difference. As Nobuki Sugihara, Chiune's son, often said in his speeches, "My father's legacy is not just about what he did in that summer of 1940. It's about what each of us chooses to do every day. It's about seeing the humanity in each other, about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to change lives, to shape history." And so, the story of the Sugihara'S lives on, not just in history books and museums, but in the hearts and actions of people around the world. It continues to challenge us, to inspire us, to call us to be our best selves. In a world that often seems divided and full of conflict, the legacy of Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara stands as a testament to the best of humanity. It reminds us that borders, nationalities, and ideologies pale in comparison to the bonds of our shared humanity. That in the end, the most powerful force in the world is not hatred or fear, but love and compassion. As we face the challenges of our own time, the Sugihara'S story calls us to action. It asks us to consider, what will be our response to the great moral questions of our age? How will we use our own pen, our own voice, our own hands to shape a better world? In the end, the story of the Sugihara'S is not just about what happened in Kaunas in the summer of 1940. It's about what happens in our hearts and in our actions every day. It's about the choice we all face, in ways big and small, to stand up for what is right, to help those in need, to be the change we wish to see in the world. As we close this chapter of the Sugihara'S extraordinary tale, let us carry forward the flame of their courage and compassion. Let us remember that in the darkest of times, one person can make a difference. That love is stronger than hate, that hope is more powerful than fear, and that the human spirit, when guided by compassion and moral courage, can overcome even the greatest of evils. The legacy of Chiune and Yukiko Sugihara lives on, not just in museums and history books, but in the hearts and actions of people around the world who choose every day to stand up for what is right. In doing so, they honor not only the memory of two extraordinary individuals, but the very best of our shared humanity. As we face the challenges of our own time, let us ask ourselves, what would Chiune and Yukiko do? And more importantly, what will we do? For in the end, their story is not just about the past, but about the future we choose to create, one act of courage and compassion at a time. Yendi.